Good morning, good morning, good morning.
Good morning. Today is the 9th day of Adar, and it's the 2nd of March. And we are theoretically up to the 5th reading, which has many interesting things. I was debating in the morning whether to talk about the 5th reading or to continue with the 3rd that we didn't, or the 4th rather, that we didn't really finish with the bells. You know what? We'll try to do both. Let's see if we can fit both in. So let's start with the bells. I want to finish with them. There's a whole question about why does the coat or the robe of the high priest need to have bells on it? So the simple answer is, of course, that whenever you walk into some place, there's a bell, and the idea is that you should announce your entrance so that people are not startled. But the way that it's usually described in terms of the tabernacle is that the high priest has to act this way to announce his entrance, because it's like a palace. And in a palace, it's even more important. It's not just the etiquette, the regular etiquette of knocking on someone's door before you walk in, but it's also the honor of the king that lives there, that people are announced. And so the high priest has these bells on him, and he's announced as he comes in. The only problem with that theory, which is a pretty big problem, is that on Yom Kippur, the high priest doesn't wear these ornamental robes. He doesn't wear 8 articles of clothing. He serves in what we call bigdei lavan, in white clothing, and none of these ornaments are worn, so he doesn't have the robe with the bells. And in Yom Kippur, he walks into the Holy of Holies. So I would have thought that on that day, certainly he should be wearing something that makes a sound as he enters. And yet it's not that way. He doesn't wear it at all. So the answer is, and this is how we have to understand this, that the Holy of Holies is like the world of emanation. The world of emanation is the world where there is only consciousness of God. There is nothing separate. And it says about that world, like Elijah says on the Mount Carmel, Lo barash Hashem kim kol dmama daka. That God is not in the sound. He's not in the noise. He's actually in a still and silent space. Kol dmama daka, or they usually translate it as still, silent sound or voice. The stillness is actually what characterizes the highest state of being with God. So therefore, on Yom Kippur, when he walks into the Holy of Holies, he doesn't need to make sound, because that place is silent. It's silent, full of awe. That's the idea behind it. So that explains it quite well. The Rebbe, though, he continues to ask about this, a very important continuation of this thought, which is, if the bells are here to announce his entrance, so why is it that he wears it throughout his service in the sanctuary, or even outside in the courtyard? If the bells are really there to announce his entrance, he should take it off when it should be a one-time thing. But he conducts all the work of the entire regular weekday and Shabbat with this robe on. So the Rebbe gives a completely different answer, and he says, based on this idea that there is silence in the Holy of Holies and there's noise in the sanctuary and in the courtyard, he says that the bells represent those people who are Balei Tshuva. And then you can see right away that this is the Rebbe's way of thinking. He says, Balei Tshuva, they make a lot of noise. They're not silent. And it's a natural outcome of the fact that they're trying to shake off the years of not being close to God. They're trying to get rid of it. And he gives a parable. It's like when a person feels that he's drowning and he's trying to get out of the water. You don't expect him to silently and quietly go about his business and just somehow take himself out very quietly. When a person's drowning, he does everything in order to save himself. So you see him splashing around, and you see him crying, and you see him struggling. And that struggle is the noise that the Baalei Tshuva make. And he says, of course, that noise is welcome. That's why the high priest takes it in with him to the sanctuary when he wears this robe. And therefore he serves the whole time with this robe, because he's using the energy of the Baalei Tshuva that make noise and make sound, that are struggling, that are trying to break out of where they were cast into the treacherous waters. He's taking it with him, and that energy is being used to serve in the sanctuary. But then he says, what about the Holy of Holies? There's no sound. He says, yes, there's two types of service of God. There's the service of the Baalei Tshuva, which today is the overwhelming majority of the Jewish people. And there's the service of those who are tzaddikim, of those who, right, Baalei Tshuva is me too, because even though I may have grown up in a religious environment, I'm still a Baalei Tshuva all the time. I still understand what it means to struggle. But there are people who are tzaddikim, who are constantly with God, and they serve God out of silence. And that's the silence of the Holy of Holies. On Yom Kippur, to a large degree, everyone is at the level of tzaddikim. Everybody is at the level of being like a tzaddik. And so therefore the service there is silent without the robe. So that's a little bit more about the bells. There's one more thing that I wanted to discuss about what we saw yesterday from the Talmud, from Tractate Arachin, folio 16b. The notion that the bells of the robe atone for evil speech, for improper speech. So here we get a sort of an idea of it, that he's taking in the sound of the Baalei Tshuva, he's taking it in with him into the sanctuary. But you can take this even further, and here we have a really deep idea. This idea is far more universal than just in Torah. We tend to think that we speak. We tend to think that we're saying something. And we tend to think that we're saying it to someone else. But the way that speech is viewed in Kabbalah, the way it's viewed, not just in Kabbalah, but in many mystical traditions. And actually this particular reflection comes from Tagore, who was a very important Indian writer who won the Nobel Prize for Literature. And he says, everything that people are saying, they're saying to God. It seems to us that we're speaking to other people. But why does negative speech have such a tremendous impact? Because in the end, everything that we're saying to God. When I say about someone, he's so-and-so, I don't like the way he's this way, he's that way. Really what we're saying is, God, I don't like the way you are. Because you're being reflected through this person. One of my teachers, Rabbi Fruman, he used to quip about this. He said there was a famous joke in Russia that somebody was brought before the Tsar, and he asked, what did you do wrong? So he said, he called you an idiot. Really? He called me an idiot? I want to talk to him. So they brought him in front of him, and he says, did you call me an idiot? He says, absolutely not. I was standing in the market, and I was yelling at my friend, you're an idiot. So he looks at the officer that brought him in, and says he said this about his friend. Why do you say? What do you mean? Everything that people say in the market is about you. He was calling you the idiot. That's how you need to see speech. That really, in the end, we're talking all the time about God, and that's why speech has such a tremendous impact, and it carries so much weight. And so, the sound that the high priest is bringing in with his robe is, in a sense, saying, yes, all the sounds that were spoken throughout the year were about you, Hashem. And I'm bringing them all here to atone for them. this is where we atone for it. And this is an idea that needs to be explored a lot more, because halachically that is exactly the idea behind atonement, but we don't have time for it. Let's get into something that we won't be able to finish today, so we'll finish it tomorrow, God willing. In the fifth reading, today's reading, we learn of the 7 days that are called the 7 days of installation, of installing the priests. What did Aaron and his 4 sons need, and 2 grandchildren need to go through in order to become priests? And so there were 7 days of installation, Yemei Miluim. During these days, they brought certain sacrifices, which we read about in our reading. Most of the sacrifices that they brought were, I don't remember if it's most, but many of them were what we call shlamim. What are shlamim? Shlamim means, they come from the root shalom, which means peace, and it also means whole. But interestingly, the shlamim, all the types of shlamim sacrifices were eaten half and half, or a quarter and 3/4, each one a little bit differently. Most of the meat from the sacrifice was eaten by the person who brought the sacrifice, and only a small portion of the fat and other parts was put on the altar and was burnt on the altar. What kind of a sacrifice is this? So the sages say it's called a shlamim, it's called a peace sacrifice, because it brings peace between man and God. How is that? It says that by the fact that the person who is bringing this sacrifice, he is also being atoned for because of his sacrifice. So on the one hand, he's enjoying the meal, and usually when a person brought a sacrifice that was a shlamim, it was usually a big enough animal that it was a feast that he would do for all his relatives, for all his friends. It was a very big deal. So he creates peace here below, that he enjoys it, and his family enjoys it, and his friends enjoy it, and the altar enjoys it. So everybody's enjoying this sacrifice. In fact, there were many people who wouldn't eat meat in Jerusalem. There were many people who were tremendously pious, who would not eat any meat that was not from a shlamim sacrifice. And that was the original meaning of a seudat mitzvah, of a feast that is a mitzvah. Because there you actually, when you ate the meat, you had to say a special bracha because it was part of the sacrifice. What we're going to continue with tomorrow is an incredible section in the Zohar, in this week's Zohar, that explains why is it that this brings peace about between man and God, and why is it so important that from the mitzvah that we do, we also get a certain portion. But this we'll have to postpone till tomorrow, because we're out of time, and God willing we'll continue tomorrow. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.